The desert wind carried the scent of blood and gunpowder across the Wyoming Badlands. Elias Boone clutched his side, feeling the warm wetness seep through his fingers as his horse stumbled beneath him. The animal was exhausted, foam flecking its mouth, and Elias knew they couldn't run much longer. Behind him, the thunder of hooves grew louder. The Cassidy gang, 7 men strong, all wanted dead or alive, had been chasing him for 3 days straight. Their leader, Dutch Cassidy, had sworn to kill Elias slowly for what he'd done. The crime? Elias had stumbled upon the gang attacking a Lakota family traveling through Texas, and he'd done what any decent man would do. He'd put bullets in 2 of Dutch's brothers and helped the family escape into the night. Now Dutch wanted revenge, and Elias was running out of places to hide. The landscape shifted as his horse carried him deeper into unfamiliar territory. Red Canyon loomed ahead, its towering sandstone walls rising like the bones of ancient giants. The locals in the last town had warned him about this place, speaking in hushed whispers about something that lived in those canyons. The Tall Lady, they'd called her, crossing themselves as if warding off evil. Elias didn't believe in ghost stories, but he believed in survival. The canyon offered cover, narrow passages where 7 men couldn't ride abreast. It was his only chance. His horse whinnied and reared as they entered the shadow of the canyon walls. Elias tried to hold on, but his wounded side betrayed him. He felt himself sliding, the world tilting sideways, and then the hard earth rushed up to meet him. The impact drove the air from his lungs. His horse bolted deeper into the canyon, leaving him alone in the dust. Elias tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. The wound in his side was worse than he'd thought. The bullet had gone deep, probably nicked something important. He could hear Dutch's gang entering the canyon now, their voices echoing off the stone walls. "Split up!" Dutch's voice rang out. "He can't have gone far. Whoever finds him first, keep him alive. I want to look him in the eyes when I gut him." Elias dragged himself toward a cluster of boulders, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. He'd survived a war, outlived 2 wives, and walked away from more gunfights than he could count. It seemed wrong that he'd die here, alone in some God-forsaken canyon, hunted like an animal. His hand found his revolver, 4 bullets left. Not enough to take them all, but enough to make sure Dutch joined him in hell. The voices grew closer. Elias raised his gun, finger on the trigger, waiting for the first shadow to appear around the boulder. Then the earth shook. It wasn't an earthquake, but rhythmic tremors like footsteps, heavy footsteps. The gang's horses screamed in terror, and men shouted in confusion. Elias heard gunshots, followed by a roar that didn't sound quite human, a sound of rage and pain and something else. Loneliness, perhaps. The shooting stopped. The horses fled, and then silence. Elias tried to keep his eyes open, but the darkness was winning. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was a shadow falling over him, impossibly tall, impossibly large, blotting out the sun. When Elias woke, he thought he'd died and gone to some strange afterlife. He was lying on something soft. Furs, he realized, bear and elk pelts stitched together. Above him was a ceiling of woven branches and canvas, crude but effective. Firelight danced on the walls, casting enormous shadows. And kneeling beside him, her face level with his, despite her sitting position, was the largest human being Elias had ever seen. She had to be 12 feet tall, maybe more. Her features were perfectly proportioned, delicate even, high cheekbones, full lips, enormous eyes the color of sage honey. Her hair was a cascade of auburn waves that fell past her shoulders. She wore a dress made from what looked like multiple wagon covers stitched together, dyed a deep forest green. She was beautiful, and she was terrified. "You're not supposed to be awake yet," she whispered, her voice like distant thunder, pulling back slightly. "I'm sorry. I tried to help. Did I hurt you? I tried to be careful with the bandages, but my hands are so big and humans are so small, and I've never—" "Easy," Elias said, his own voice rough as gravel. "You saved my life, didn't you?" She nodded, still watching him with those enormous, wary eyes. "The bad men, they were going to hurt you. I made them leave." "Made them leave," Elias repeated, then noticed the blood on her knuckles, bruises already forming on her pale skin. "You fought 7 armed men?" "They shot me," she said simply, pulling aside her collar to reveal a bullet wound in her shoulder already bandaged. It hurt, but not as much as the things they said. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "They called me monster." Elias studied her face, the hurt written there, the shame. He'd seen that look before, on soldiers coming back from the war, on children who'd been beaten, on anyone who'd been told they were less than human for long enough that they started to believe it. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She blinked, surprised by the question. "Aurelia? My mother named me Aurelia before—" She trailed off, pain flickering across her features. "I'm Elias Boone." He tried to sit up, gasping as his wound protested. Immediately, Aurelia's hand moved to support him, a hand larger than his head, but gentle as a whisper. "And, Aurelia, I've seen monsters, fought them in the war, hunted them across 3 territories. You're not one of them." Tears welled in her enormous eyes, spilling down her cheeks like small streams. "You don't know what you're saying. You haven't seen—" "I'm wrong. I've always been wrong. Too big, too strong, too different. My own family left me here when I was 7. They said I was a curse, a punishment from God." "Your family were fools," Elias said flatly, "and cowards." Aurelia shook her head, but didn't argue. She helped him drink from a cup the size of a small bucket, then carefully changed his bandages. Her fingers, despite their size, were remarkably dexterous. She clearly practiced this, probably on animals. The stitching on his wound was better than most army surgeons could manage. "How long have you been alone here?" Elias asked. 15 years, she said quietly. "I'm 22 now. I hunt elk and bear. I gather berries and roots. Sometimes I watch the town from the ridge, but I never go close. Once, a boy saw me. He screamed so loud, so long." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't want to scare anyone anymore. It's better if I stay hidden." Elias felt something crack open in his chest, a familiar ache. He knew loneliness. His first wife had died of fever, his second in childbirth, along with their son. He'd spent 20 years drifting from town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots, never letting anyone get close enough to lose. "Tell me something, Aurelia," he said. "If you're so dangerous, so monstrous, why didn't you let Dutch's gang kill me? Why not just stay hidden?" She looked at her hands, those enormous, capable hands that could crush stone but had bandaged his wounds with infinite care. "Because you were hurt. Because it was wrong what they were doing. Because—" She met his eyes, and he saw the truth there, raw and desperate. "Because I'm so tired of being alone." The words hung in the air between them, a confession and a prayer. "Then don't be," Elias said simply. Recovery was slow. Elias had lost a lot of blood, and the bullet had done more damage than he'd initially thought. For 2 weeks, he was mostly bedridden in Aurelia's cave, a massive cavern she'd made into a home, with furniture carved from whole trees and walls decorated with surprisingly delicate charcoal drawings of animals, plants, and landscapes. During those weeks, they talked. It started hesitantly. Aurelia had spent so long alone that conversation was a half-forgotten skill. But Elias was patient, and gradually her words came easier. She told him about her childhood, about being born to normal-sized parents who'd watched in horror as their daughter grew and grew, outpacing other children by feet rather than inches, about the whispers in church, the accusations of demon spawn, the night her father had brought her to Red Canyon and told her to wait while he fetched water, and never came back. "I waited 3 days," she said, staring into the fire. "I was so sure he'd come back. When I finally accepted he wasn't coming, I cried so hard I thought I'd die. I wanted to die." "But you didn't," Elias said. "No, something in me refused. I was angry, I think. Angry enough to survive." She looked at him. "What about you? Why were you alone?" So Elias told her his story. The war, the wives he'd loved and lost, the decades of drifting because staying in one place meant remembering all he'd lost. He told her about the Lakota family, about choosing to do right, even knowing it would cost him everything. "You could have kept riding," Aurelia said. "You could have let the bad things happen and saved yourself." "Could have," Elias agreed, "but then I'd have to live with myself, and that's a harder sentence than any bullet." She smiled at that, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, making her look younger, lighter. "You're a good man, Elias Boone. I'm a man who makes questionable choices and has the scars to prove it," he corrected. But he was smiling too. As he grew stronger, Elias began helping around the cave. He couldn't do much at first, but he could cook, something Aurelia had never really learned properly. He taught her how to make coffee, how to season meat properly, how to bake bread in the coals of her enormous fireplace. In return, she showed him her world, the hidden hot springs where she bathed, the berry patches she cultivated, the places where eagles nested in the canyon walls. She moved through the landscape with surprising grace despite her size, knowing every foothold, every safe path. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Aurelia said, "Elias, can I ask you something?" "Anything?" She hesitated, wringing her massive hands together. "The people in town, do they ever touch each other? I mean, without hurting?" It was such an innocent question, but it hit Elias like a punch to the gut. She'd been alone for 15 years without a single kind touch. "Yes," he said gently. "People touch all the time. Handshakes, hugs, holding hands. Touch it's how we tell each other we're not alone." "I've never—" She looked at her hands again, and he saw tears gathering. "I've never touched another person, not since I was 7, and even then they would flinch, pull away. I learned not to try." She took a shuddering breath. "Elias, I'm so afraid." "Of what?" "That if I try again, if I reach out, I'll hurt someone, or they'll scream like that boy did, or—" Her voice broke. "Or they'll look at me the way my father looked at me the night he left, like I'm something wrong, something that shouldn't exist." Elias was quiet for a long moment, thinking about fear, about loneliness, about all the ways people hurt each other and themselves. Then he stood, moving slowly, and walked to where she sat. "Aurelia," he said, "give me your hand." She stared at him, eyes wide with fear and hope. "Elias, I might—" "You won't," he said firmly. "Trust me, and trust yourself." Slowly, trembling, Aurelia extended her hand. It was enormous, her palm the size of a dinner plate, fingers as thick as his wrist. She held it there, suspended in the air between them, shaking like a leaf. Elias placed his hand on hers. The contact was warm, solid, real. Aurelia gasped, tears streaming down her face. "First time will hurt," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It has to hurt. Everything hurts when you're like me." "It won't," Elias said softly, closing his fingers around her thumb, the only part of her hand he could grip. "Not with me. I promise you, Aurelia, this won't hurt." And it didn't. They sat like that for a long time, his hand on hers, both of them crying quietly. She from relief and joy and 15 years of loneliness finally acknowledged. He from the profound privilege of being trusted by someone who had every reason never to trust again. "Thank you," she whispered finally. "Thank you for not being afraid of me." "Thank you," Elias replied, "for saving a broken-down old cowboy's life." She laughed through her tears, a sound like wind chimes and distant thunder, beautiful and strange and uniquely hers. But peace, Elias had learned, was always temporary in the territories. 3 days later, he was checking his traps in the outer canyon when he spotted riders approaching. His heart sank as he recognized the lead horse, a black stallion with a white blaze, Dutch Cassidy. The gang had regrouped, added more men, and come back. There were at least a dozen now, all heavily armed, all out for blood. Elias ran back to the cave, his partially healed wound screaming in protest. "Aurelia!" he shouted as he burst inside. "We have trouble, big trouble." She was at the hot spring, cleaning clothes. The alarm in his voice brought her to her feet immediately. The bad men? They're back. More of them this time. He checked his revolver, still only 4 bullets, and he hadn't found his rifle. "Aurelia, you need to hide deep in the canyon where they can't—" "No." The word was soft, but absolute. Aurelia walked to the mouth of the cave, looking down at the approaching riders. Her jaw was set, her enormous hands clenched into fists. "They hurt you once," she said. "I won't let them do it again." "Aurelia, they'll kill you. They have rifles, probably dynamite. You can't—" She turned to look at him, and he saw something new in her eyes. Not fear, not shame, but determination. "All my life I've hidden," she said. "I've made myself small, stayed quiet, pretended I didn't exist because my existence scared people. But Elias, you told me I wasn't a monster. You held my hand and didn't flinch. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like a person." She stepped closer, kneeling so their faces were level. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid, and I won't hide while they hurt someone I care about." The riders were closer now. Elias could hear Dutch's voice carrying up the canyon. "Boone, I know you're here. Come out and face me, you coward." Elias looked at Aurelia, this woman who'd been abandoned, rejected, forced into a life of solitude, yet somehow remained gentle, remained kind, who'd saved his life and asked for nothing in return, who'd cried at the simple touch of his hand. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this smart. I've got 4 bullets and 30 years of shooting experience. You've got strength and home-ground advantage. We make them regret ever coming back." Aurelia smiled, fierce and bright and completely without fear. "Tell me what to do." They planned quickly. Elias would position himself on a high ledge with a clear view of the canyon entrance. Aurelia would use the network of caves and passages she knew intimately, positioning massive boulders above the narrow passages where the gang would have to ride single file. As the sun climbed higher, painting the red canyon walls the color of blood, Dutch Cassidy led his men into the throat of the trap. Elias fired first, a single shot that knocked the hat off Dutch's head, sending the gang scrambling for cover. "That's your warning shot," Elias shouted. "Turn around and ride out, and we'll call it even." Dutch's response was a hail of rifle fire that chipped stone around Elias's position. "You're dead, Boone, you and whatever freak you're hiding with." That word, freak, seemed to echo through the canyon. Elias saw Aurelia flinch where she crouched behind an outcropping. For a moment, he feared she'd retreat, that 15 years of conditioning would override her courage. Then her face hardened. She stood to her full height, stepping into view at the canyon entrance. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Horses reared, men shouted in fear and confusion. Several guns went off, bullets whining past Aurelia's head and body. One caught her in the arm, another grazed her ribs, but she didn't stop. "You should leave," she said, her voice carrying through the canyon like thunder. "You're not welcome here." Dutch recovered first, his greed for revenge overcoming his fear. "What in the hell are you? Don't matter. You'll die just like Boone." He raised his rifle. Aurelia moved with shocking speed for something so large. She grabbed a boulder the size of a wagon and hurled it down the canyon. Men scattered, horses screamed, and the rock crashed through the gang's formation like a cannonball, crushing one man's leg and scattering the others. The battle became chaos. Elias picked his shots carefully, his 3 remaining bullets taking down men who tried to flank Aurelia. She fought like something from a legend, lifting massive stones, kicking horses aside without seriously hurting them, using her size and strength to turn the narrow canyon into a killing ground for the gang. But there were too many, and they were too determined. A stick of dynamite landed near Aurelia's feet. She kicked it away, but the explosion still caught her, throwing her against the canyon wall. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and she stumbled. Dutch saw his opening. He raised his rifle, aiming for her heart. Elias didn't think. He jumped from his ledge, a 12-foot drop that sent agony lancing through his barely healed wound, and tackled Dutch just as he fired. The shot went wide, and both men tumbled across the ground, fighting for control of the rifle. Dutch was younger, stronger, meaner. He got on top, hands closing around Elias's throat. "You should have minded your own business, old man. Should have let us have our fun with those savages. Now you're gonna die, and your freak girl gets to watch." Elias's vision darkened. He could hear Aurelia screaming his name, could hear the remaining gang members shooting at her, trying to keep her back while Dutch finished him. Then a shadow fell over them both. Aurelia's hand closed around Dutch like he was a doll. She lifted him off Elias, held him at arm's length as he kicked and swore and fired his pistol uselessly at her massive arm. "You hurt him," she said, and her voice was different now, deeper, harder, edged with a rage that had been building for 15 years. "You hurt him, and you called me freak, and you think you can just take and hurt and kill because you're small and mean and cruel?" She threw him, Not hard enough to kill. Aurelia couldn't do that, Elias saw. Even now her essential kindness held her back. But hard enough to send Dutch flying 20 feet to land in a heap, groaning. The remaining gang members broke and ran. They'd signed up for robbing and killing, not fighting giants. Aurelia knelt beside Elias, her hands impossibly gentle as they checked his wounds. "You jumped," she said, and there were tears in her voice. "You jumped to save me. You could have died." "Couldn't let him hurt you," Elias wheezed. "Not after everything, not after you finally decided to stop hiding." She picked him up, cradling him against her chest as easily as a mother with an infant, and carried him back to the cave. Behind them, Dutch Cassidy crawled to his horse and rode away, the legend of the tall lady of Red Canyon growing darker and more fearsome with every mile. The wounds healed, but slower this time. Elias had reopened his side and cracked some ribs in the fall. Aurelia had been shot 3 times, burned by the dynamite, and cut badly by flying rock. They recovered together, helping each other change bandages, sharing stories through the pain, learning the rhythms of each other's breathing. One night, a week after the battle, Aurelia asked, "Why did you jump? You could have let him shoot me. I'm hard to kill, but you're just human." "Just human," Elias repeated with a soft laugh. "You say that like it's a weakness. Isn't it? You're small, fragile. A single bullet could end you." "Maybe," Elias agreed. "But being human isn't about size or strength, Aurelia. It's about choices. And I chose you. I'll always choose you." She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "No one's ever chosen me before. Everyone who was supposed to love me, they all chose to leave." "Their loss," Elias said simply, "and my gain. Elias, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." She turned to face him, and in her enormous eyes he saw fear and hope warring for dominance. "When you heal, will you leave? Will you go back to your life, your people, your world? Will I be alone again?" The question hit him harder than Dutch's fists had. Elias looked around the cave at the careful drawings on the walls, the furniture carved with patient hands, the life Aurelia had built from nothing but determination and loneliness. Then he looked at her, this magnificent, impossible woman who'd saved his life, who'd trusted him with her deepest wounds, who'd fought a dozen men to protect him. "I spent 20 years running," he said quietly, "running from memories, from loss, from the possibility of ever caring about someone again. I told myself I was free, but really I was just afraid. Afraid of feeling that pain again if I lost someone." He reached out, placing his hand on hers in the gesture that had become familiar between them. "But Aurelia, hiding from pain isn't living, it's just slowly dying. You taught me that." "I taught you?" She sounded surprised. "You survived 15 years of complete isolation and somehow remained kind. You chose to save me when you could have let me die. You chose to fight when you could have hidden. You chose to be brave when the world had given you every reason to be afraid." He squeezed her thumb gently. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. And no, I'm not leaving. Not unless you want me to." "Want you to?" Her laugh was half-sob. "Elias, you're the only person in the world who's looked at me and seen something worth caring about. If you leave, I'll—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Then I stay," Elias said firmly. "We'll figure it out. Build something here, together. I'm done running, Aurelia. I'm done being alone. If you'll have me, if you'll trust me, I'd like to stay." The tears came then from both of them. Aurelia carefully, so carefully, drew Elias into a hug, mindful of his injuries, mindful of her strength, mindful of the precious fragility of this moment. He wrapped his arms around as much of her as he could reach and held on, two lonely souls finally finding harbor in each other. "First time will hurt," she whispered, the old fear still there. "It won't," he promised. "Not now, not ever." And somehow, impossibly, it was true. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Aurelia's life. Elias was full of stories from his decades of wandering, tales of the war, of cattle drives, of the strange and wonderful people he'd met across the territories. He told her about cities she'd never seen, oceans she'd only read about in a water-damaged book she'd found years ago, cultures and customs from a world she'd been denied. In return, she showed him the intimate knowledge she'd gained of Red Canyon, the way the light painted the walls at dawn, the secret passages that connected different parts of the canyon system, the ancient petroglyphs left by people who'd lived here centuries before. Elias taught her to read better. She'd taught herself from a few books left by her family, but he expanded her vocabulary, explained grammar, introduced her to the pleasure of stories. They read together in the evenings, her holding the book at a height comfortable for both of them. Aurelia taught him about survival in ways he'd never imagined, how to read the weather in the canyon winds, how to process an entire elk efficiently, how to find water in seemingly dry rocks. But more than skills, they taught each other trust. For Aurelia, it was learning that touch could be gentle, that presence could be comforting rather than threatening, that she could exist in her full size without making herself small to avoid scaring someone. Elias never flinched, never pulled away, never looked at her with anything but respect and growing affection. For Elias, it was learning to stay, to put down roots, to allow himself to care without the constant fear of loss. Aurelia's presence was too large to ignore, too real to run from. She forced him to be present, to be honest, to be vulnerable in ways he hadn't allowed himself in decades. One afternoon, 2 months after the battle, they were sitting by the hot springs. Elias was mending his shirt, torn in the fight, while Aurelia worked on sketching a new drawing for her wall, her charcoal moving across the stretched hide in confident strokes. "Elias," she said without looking up from her work, "what do people do when they care about each other, beyond talking and holding hands?" He set down his needle, considering the question. "Well, that depends. Friends care for each other, look out for each other, enjoy each other's company. Family does the same, but with history and obligation mixed in. And then there's—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's what happens when two people decide they don't want to be apart. When they build a life together, not just separately in the same place, but truly together." "Like a marriage?" Aurelia's voice was very quiet. "Like a marriage," Elias confirmed. She was silent for so long that Elias thought he'd made a mistake bringing it up. Then, still not looking at him, she said, "No one would ever marry someone like me. I can't fit in a church. I can't wear a wedding dress from a store. I can't be small enough to fit into a person's life." "Aurelia, look at me." She did, and he saw the pain there, the old wounds of rejection still raw despite everything. "You don't need to fit into someone else's life," he said. "The right person will build a life that fits both of you, and for what it's worth." He took a breath, feeling more nervous than he had facing Dutch's gang. I'm 53 years old. I've been married twice, lost both wives, and spent half my life alone. I thought I was done with all that I'd die a lonely old bastard in some dusty town. But then you saved my life, and you trusted me, and you let me see who you really are. Not the giant, not the freak, but Aurelia. Kind, strong, brave Aurelia. He stood, walked to where she sat, and placed his hand on hers. I can't get down on one knee. My ribs won't take it. I don't have a ring. We're in the middle of nowhere. I can't promise you a normal life. There's nothing normal about us. But I can promise you that I will never leave. I will never flinch. I will never look at you like you're anything less than extraordinary. His voice roughened with emotion. Aurelia, I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not because you're convenient or because you're what I can get, but because in 2 months you've become the person I most want to wake up beside, the person whose opinion I value most, the person I want to spend whatever years I have left loving. Aurelia stared at him, her enormous eyes wide with shock. You want to marry me? Really marry me? Really marry you? Elias confirmed. If you'll have a broken down old cowboy with a price on his head and more scars than sense. She laughed, that beautiful sound he'd come to love, even as tears streamed down her face. Yes, she said. Yes, 1,000 times yes. She picked him up, gently as always, and held him close, laughing and crying at once. Elias wrapped his arms around her neck, breathing in the scent of her, pine and wood smoke and something uniquely hers. How will we do it? She asked when she finally set him down. There's no preacher who'll marry us, no town that will let me inside. Then we'll do it ourselves, Elias said, right here in front of the canyon walls and the sky. We'll speak the words, make the promises, and that'll be marriage enough for me. So they did. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls gold and crimson, they stood together at the mouth of Aurelia's cave. Elias spoke first, his voice steady and sure. I, Elias Boone, take you, Aurelia, to be my wife. I promise to stand beside you in whatever comes. I promise never to run from you, from us, from the life we're building. I promise to see you, not as giant or small, but simply as you. And I promise to love you, for whatever days I have left, with everything I am. Aurelia's voice shook at first, then grew stronger. I, Aurelia, take you, Elias Boone, to be my husband. I promise to protect you, to trust you, to let you close even when fear tells me to hide. I promise to be brave, to choose love over loneliness, to believe that I am worthy of you. Her voice broke, even when it's hard to believe. And I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live. They had no rings, so instead, Elias took a length of leather cord and tied it around Aurelia's wrist, a bracelet she could wear always. She, in turn, gave him one of her drawings, a sketch of them sitting together by the fire, his small form and her large one rendered with careful love on a piece of stretched hide. To remind you, she said softly, that we belong together no matter how strange the world might think we are. They sealed their vows with a kiss, awkward because of the size difference, but no less real. Elias had to climb up on a boulder, and Aurelia had to bend almost double, but when their lips met, it felt like coming home. Winter came to Red Canyon, bringing snow and cold winds. Elias built a cabin at the mouth of Aurelia's cave, small for her but comfortable for him, positioned so they could easily move between his human-sized space and her giant-scaled home. It was practical, allowing Elias to maintain things at his scale while Aurelia lived comfortably at hers. But most nights they stayed in her cave, where the fire was larger and the ceiling high enough that she didn't have to hunch. Elias would read aloud while Aurelia sewed or carved, their comfortable silence punctuated by comments and questions. One particularly cold evening, wrapped in furs by the fire, Aurelia asked, "Do you ever regret it, staying here with me instead of returning to civilization?" Elias looked at her, this woman who'd taught him what courage really meant, who'd given him a reason to stop running, who made him laugh every day with her observations about his strange, small people customs. Regret? He shook his head. "Aurelia, I spent 20 years in civilization, and I was lonelier there than I've ever been here. You think isolation is about physical distance, but the loneliest I ever felt was standing in a crowded saloon, surrounded by people who didn't really know me." He took her hand, the gesture natural now. "Here, with you, I'm known, I'm seen, I'm home. Why would I regret that?" "Because you gave up so much. Friends, towns, the chance to settle somewhere with other people." "I gave up nothing I valued," Elias interrupted gently, "and I gained everything that matters. You, this place, the life we're building. That's not sacrifice, Aurelia. That's choosing what's real over what's expected." She smiled, but he saw the lingering doubt in her eyes. 22 years of rejection didn't disappear overnight. So he told her, again and in new ways, that she was worthy of love. He told her through actions, staying when things were hard, laughing at her jokes, asking her opinion, treating her choices as important. He told her through words, casual endearments, expressions of appreciation, plans for a future that included both of them. And slowly, gradually, she began to believe. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the canyon. Flowers bloomed in impossible places, birds nested in the cliff walls, and the hot springs ran warm and clear. Elias was checking his traps one morning when he spotted riders approaching the canyon entrance. His hand went to his gun. He'd finally found and repaired his rifle. But these weren't Dutch's gang. These were different men, traveling with pack horses and surveying equipment. They spotted him and approached cautiously. The leader, a man in his 40s with engineer's hands and a scholarly air, called out, "Hello there. We're not looking for trouble. We're with the railroad survey team, mapping potential routes through the territory." "Railroad?" Elias repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. The Union Pacific is planning expansion through this region. We're documenting geography, resources, potential obstacles." The engineer smiled. "Beautiful country out here. You homesteading?" "Something like that," Elias said noncommittally. His mind was racing. Railroad meant towns, meant people, meant the isolation of Red Canyon would end, meant Aurelia's sanctuary would be invaded. The engineers were polite, asked a few questions about water sources and winter weather, then moved on. But Elias knew they'd be back. Progress was inevitable, and Red Canyon wouldn't stay secret forever. He returned to find Aurelia at the cave entrance, having watched the exchange from hiding. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "They're going to bring the railroad through here," she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe, might be years before it happens, if it happens at all. Surveys don't always mean construction. But it could happen. She looked out at the canyon that had been her whole world for 15 years. And then people will come. Towns will grow, and they'll find me. Elias took her hand. Then we'll deal with it. Together. How? The fear in her voice made his heart ache. Elias, you saw how they looked at me when they attacked. You heard what they called me. What happens when hundreds of people know I'm here? Will they try to capture me, study me, kill me, run me out like my own family did? No, Elias said firmly, because I won't let them, because we'll find a way to make this work. And if we can't, he met her eyes, if we can't, then we'll go somewhere else. Canada, maybe, or deep into the mountains. Somewhere we can build a life without fear. You'd leave this place after all the work we've done? Aurelia, the place doesn't matter. You matter. Us matter. Everything else is just geography. But he could see the idea tormented her, the thought of running again, of never being able to stand her ground, of always being the thing that had to hide. I'm tired of running, she whispered. I'm tired of hiding. But I'm so afraid, Elias. I'm so afraid of losing this, losing you, losing the only home I've ever really had. Then we don't run, Elias said. We stay, we build, and when people come, if people come, we face them together. We show them what you really are, not a monster, not a freak, but a woman, a person, someone worthy of respect and left in peace. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple, Elias admitted. It'll probably be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. But Aurelia, you faced down a dozen armed men for me. I think you can face down fear and prejudice. She was quiet for a long time, then slowly nodded. Together? Together, he confirmed. Always together. Summer brought another surprise. Visitors. Not railroad engineers this time, but a Lakota family. The same family Elias had saved in Texas. They'd tracked him across hundreds of miles, following stories and rumors, trying to repay the debt they felt they owed. The old grandmother spoke English, learned in a mission school decades ago. She explained through Elias to Aurelia, who watched from the cave entrance torn between hope and fear, that they'd heard stories of a giant woman and a cowboy living in Red Canyon, and they'd known it had to be him. We bring gifts, the grandmother said, food, tools, tobacco, and knowledge. We know these lands. We can teach you to live here better if you accept. Why? Aurelia's voice was barely a whisper. Why help me? The grandmother looked up at her without flinching, without fear. Because Elias saved us when he didn't have to. Because the whites say our people are savage, inhuman, less than they are. We know what it is to be judged for what we are rather than who we are. She smiled, weathered face creasing. And because you saved Elias, that makes you family. It was the beginning of something Aurelia had never imagined, community. The Lakota family visited regularly over the following months. They taught Aurelia and Elias better ways to preserve food, how to make clothes that would last through harsh winters, medicinal uses for plants that grew in the canyon. They shared stories and songs, treated Aurelia with casual respect that amazed her more than their lack of fear. They're not afraid of me, she said to Elias one night after a visit. No, he agreed, because they see you, not the size, but you. How do they do that? Practice, maybe, or wisdom, or maybe they've just faced enough real monsters, the humankind, that they recognize kindness when they see it, no matter what package it comes in. The visits did something to Aurelia that all of Elias's reassurances hadn't quite managed. They proved that people could accept her, not just one person, not just Elias with his own scars and loneliness, but a family. children who called her Auntie Big and laughed in delight rather than fear, a grandmother who asked her advice on things, young men who treated her with the same respectful distance they'd show any married woman. She began to stand taller, to speak more freely, to believe, truly believe, that she might be worthy of the space she occupied in the world. Autumn came again, marking a full year since Elias had stumbled into Red Canyon, more dead than alive. They celebrated quietly, with a feast prepared from elk that Aurelia had hunted and vegetables Elias had convinced to grow in a small garden. As they sat by the fire that night, Aurelia said, "Elias, I need to tell you something." He heard the serious tone in her voice and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" "I'm not as alone as I thought I was. When I was 7, my mother told me there were others like me. She'd heard stories, rumors of giant people living in remote areas, mountains in Europe, forests in the north, deep in the Russian wilderness. She said," Aurelia's voice wavered, "she said maybe someday I'd find them, find people who understood what it was like to be too big for the world." "Why didn't you look for them?" "Because I was 7, and then I was alone, and I was so sure that even other giants wouldn't want me. I was convinced I was wrong, even among my own kind." She looked at her hands. "But now, with you, with the Lakota family, I wonder if maybe I could find them. If maybe there's a place in the world where I don't have to choose between hiding and being hunted." Elias felt a spike of fear, not for himself, but for her. "You want to leave? To find these other giants?" "No." She grabbed his hand urgently. "No, Elias, I'm not leaving you. I'm never leaving you. But maybe someday we could look together, see if there are others, if there's a community somewhere of people like me." He relaxed, understanding now. "You want to know you're not the only one? Yes, I love you. I love this life we've built. But there's a part of me that's still alone, still different even from you. And I wonder if finding others like me would heal that last wound." "Then we'll look," Elias said simply. "When the time is right, when we're ready, we'll go exploring, see what we can find." "You'd do that? Travel across the world just so I could meet other giants?" "Aurelia, I crossed half of Texas to save a family I didn't know. You think I wouldn't cross the world for you?" He smiled. "Besides, I'm curious now. If there are more people like you out there, I want to meet them, want to see what kind of world they've built, how they live." She laughed, pulling him into a hug. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Elias said. "I got shot, you were kind, and the rest is just us choosing each other every day." Winter came hard that year. Snow piled 6 feet deep in the canyon, and the temperature dropped so low that even the hot springs steamed like cauldrons. Elias's age began to show in stiff joints and aching bones, reminders that he wasn't as young as he used to be. Aurelia nursed him through a bad cold that scared them both. At 54, in the middle of nowhere, simple illness could turn deadly. But her patient care, the medicines the Lakota grandmother had taught her to make, and stubborn determination pulled him through. "You scared me," she said when he was finally recovering, sitting up and taking broth. "When you were feverish, talking out of your head, I thought you might leave me like everyone else has." "Not leaving," Elias said hoarsely. "Made you a promise. Till death do us part, and I'm too stubborn to die from a cold." She laughed, but he saw tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Elias. Before you came, I survived. But now, with you, I live. And the thought of going back to just surviving. Hey, he said, reaching for her hand, I'm here. We've got years yet. Decades, maybe, if we're lucky. And when my time comes, hopefully not for a long while, you'll keep living, really living, not just surviving. You'll remember what we built together, and you'll carry it forward. How do you know? Because you're strong, stronger than you know. You've already survived more than most people could imagine. You'll survive me too when the time comes. You'll grieve, and then you'll keep going, because that's what survivors do. It was a hard conversation, but a necessary one. They were building a life together, but Elias was more than 20 years older, and time had a way of catching up eventually. But not yet. Not for years yet, they told each other. And in the meantime, they had winters to survive, springs to celebrate, and a love that grew deeper with every passing season. By their second spring together, word had spread among nearby Lakota and Shoshone tribes about the giant woman and her cowboy. Occasionally, people would make the trek to Red Canyon, sometimes out of curiosity, sometimes bringing gifts, sometimes seeking Aurelia's help, moving large stones or fallen trees that blocked important paths. Aurelia approached these interactions with caution at first, but Elias watched her grow more confident with each one. She learned that her size could be a blessing rather than a curse, that her strength could help rather than hurt, that she could exist in the world without hiding. One day, a young Shoshone man came to the canyon, his face bruised and bloody. He'd been beaten by white miners who jumped his claim and left him for dead. The Lakota family had sent him to Red Canyon, knowing Aurelia would help. She tended his wounds while Elias listened to his story. When it was done, they shared a look, a conversation without words born from months of living together. "The miners are still there?" Elias asked. The young man nodded. "5 of them, armed. They'll shoot anyone who comes close." "Then it's a good thing we're not just anyone," Aurelia said quietly. They went the next morning, Aurelia, Elias, and a small group from the Lakota family. The miners saw them coming and raised their guns, but the sight of a 12-foot-tall woman striding toward them made the weapons waver. Elias did the talking because he understood men like these, greedy, violent, but ultimately cowardly. "You've got 2 choices," he said calmly. "Return what you stole, pack up, and leave, or—" He gestured to Aurelia, who picked up a boulder the size of a horse and crushed it to gravel in her bare hands. The miners chose wisely. Word spread further. "The giant bride," some called her. "Big Justice," others said. "The tall lady who helps the helpless." Aurelia became something she'd never imagined, a protector. People came to Red Canyon when they faced threats too big to handle alone, knowing she'd help if she could. She never sought payment, never asked for gratitude, but her fame grew nonetheless. "Does it bother you?" Elias asked one evening. "Being known? Having people seek you out?" Aurelia considered the question. "A year ago, it would have terrified me, but now I'm not hiding anymore. I'm not ashamed. Let them know about me. Let them come if they need help. I spent 15 years being afraid of people. I'm done with that." "You've changed," Elias observed with a smile. "You changed me," she corrected. "You showed me I could be brave." "No," he said firmly. "You were always brave. I just reminded you of it." Their 3rd year together brought the railroad, just as Elias had feared. A company town sprang up 30 miles from Red Canyon, crude buildings, rough men, the organized chaos of industrial progress. The survey team returned with construction crews, blasting through rock, laying tracks, bringing civilization to the wilderness. And with civilization came trouble. A group of workers, drunk and bored, decided to hunt the legendary monster they'd heard about. They came to Red Canyon armed with rifles and bravado, looking for sport. They found Aurelia gathering berries in a meadow. She stood her ground, hands raised peacefully, trying to speak to them. They responded with bullets. Elias heard the shots from a mile away and ran, his old soldier's instincts taking over. He arrived to find Aurelia bleeding from multiple wounds, surrounded by laughing men who were treating her like a big game animal they'd cornered. Something broke in Elias in that moment, a fury he hadn't felt since the war, cold and focused and absolutely lethal. His rifle spoke 4 times, and 4 men fell. The others scattered, suddenly realizing they'd made a terrible mistake. Aurelia collapsed, losing blood fast. Elias tended her wounds with shaking hands, terrified he'd lose her, cursing himself for not being faster, for not protecting her better. She survived, but barely. It took weeks for her to heal, and during that time, Elias made a decision. He rode into the railroad town alone, walked into the saloon where the construction crews drank, and faced them all. "My wife is not a monster," he said, his voice carrying through the sudden silence. "She's a woman. She's kind, she's brave, and she's done nothing to harm any of you. But you came to our home and shot her like an animal." "Your wife?" Someone laughed. "You married that freak?" Elias's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw. Not yet. "The next person who comes to Red Canyon looking for trouble won't leave. The next person who calls her a freak will answer to me. And I promise you, I've killed more men than most of you have years on this earth. Try me." The threat hung in the air. Most men looked away, ashamed or afraid. But one, a foreman named Garrett, stepped forward. "You threatening us, old man?" "Warning you," Elias corrected. "There's a difference. She's under my protection. She's under the protection of every Lakota and Shoshone family in this territory. You leave her alone, and we leave you alone. Simple as that." Garrett sneered, but he didn't push it. The other workers, seeing the resolve in Elias's eyes and remembering the stories they'd heard about the giant bride helping people, seemed less enthusiastic about hunting her now. Elias left, knowing the confrontation had bought them time, but not safety. The world was changing, getting smaller, and Aurelia's secret couldn't stay secret forever.